My name is Matthew Collins. I was 33 when I worked as a backcountry ranger in Olympic National Park. Most of my job involved permits, trail maintenance, and helping lost hikers. And that's why the radio call about smoke in a restricted river valley barely caught my attention at first. Then another report came in. Different hikers, same location. They all mentioned hearing a generator after dark. That part didn't make sense. No camping permits had been issued for that valley in almost 3 weeks, and generators weren't even allowed in the backcountry. I checked the permit database myself before leaving. Empty. Nobody had authorization to be there. The hike into the valley took most of the afternoon. The farther I went, the quieter everything became. Even the river sounded muffled beneath the thick cedar canopy. Around sunset, I caught the faint smell of cooked meat drifting through the trees. Fresh. Someone was close. I followed it uphill until I spotted dark tarps stretched beneath branches covered with freshly cut ferns. Whoever built the campsite knew exactly how to hide it from helicopters and passing hikers. I stepped into the clearing and called out, "National Park Service. Anyone here?" Only the hum of a cooling generator answered. The camp looked expensive. High-end tents, solar batteries, cases of equipment with every logo covered by black tape. A pot of chili still steamed over dying coals. Half-filled coffee mugs sat on folding tables. Whoever had been there couldn't have left more than a minute earlier. Then I noticed the fire ring. Instead of food wrappers or burned wood, it contained dozens of melted plastic cards, driver's licenses, employee badges, credit cards. Everyone had been shredded before being burned. Some pieces still showed faces with the eyes cut away. I photographed everything in radio dispatch. Possible abandoned encampment. Multiple destroyed IDs request sheriff response. Dispatch told me deputies would arrive the next morning. It was too dark to safely bring anyone into that valley. I camped less than half a mile away. That night I woke to footsteps. Not approaching, circling. They never came closer than the edge of my headlamp. But every few minutes, another soft crunch echoed through the leaves. Slow, deliberate. By sunrise, the sounds had stopped. When I returned to the hidden campsite with 2 deputies, it was gone. Not abandoned. Gone. The tarps, tents, generator, tables, even the ashes from the fire ring had disappeared. The ground had been brushed clean with pine boughs. If I hadn't taken photographs, I would have questioned whether I'd found anything at all. One deputy looked at me. "You sure this is the place?" I pointed toward the clearing. It was right here. The only evidence left behind was a set of deep tire tracks leading into dense forest where no legal road existed. No public vehicle could have reached that location. The sheriff's office searched the area without finding an access route. Over the next 2 weeks, I kept hiking that valley. That's when I realized someone had changed the routine. Fresh boot prints started appearing behind me, not ahead. Behind, every patrol ended with tracks, following my exact route before turning back the way they'd come. Whoever made them wasn't traveling through the forest. They were following me. I changed schedules without telling anyone. The footprints still appeared. One rainy afternoon, I climbed a ridge overlooking one of my patrol trails and noticed fresh bark shavings on a fallen cedar. Hidden behind it was a narrow shelter made from branches and camouflage netting. Inside sat binoculars, a notebook, bottled water. The notebook wasn't filled with journal entries. It listed license plate numbers, visitor names, campground arrival dates, ranger shift schedules. Some pages stretched back nearly 2 years. Every observation had a time beside it. Almost every ranger in our district appeared somewhere inside, including me. After that discovery, the National Park Service coordinated with county deputies and federal investigators without notifying the rest of the staff. We set up quiet surveillance around the closed valley. Just before midnight, we heard engines. More than one. The sound echoed through the trees before fading toward an abandoned fire road officially closed decades earlier. By the time deputies blocked both ends, the vehicles had vanished. They eventually located 3 trucks hidden beneath camouflage nets several miles away. All had altered VIN numbers. Hidden compartments lined the truck beds. No fingerprints, no clothing, no paperwork, no people, The final search focused on another concealed campsite farther up the valley. Unlike the first one, this camp hadn't been emptied in time. Maps covered folding tables, radio frequencies, trail diagrams, detailed aerial photographs. I expected to see campsites or tourist areas. Instead, every photo centered on park employees, maintenance crews, trail workers, seasonal volunteers, the superintendent, my supervisor. Then I found an entire folder labeled with my name. There were dozens of photographs. Me unlocking the ranger station before sunrise. Me loading equipment into my truck. Me eating lunch outside the maintenance barn. Me standing alone on remote trails. Some pictures had been taken from less than 50 yards away. I never remembered seeing another person nearby. Investigators searched that valley for weeks. No arrests were made. Nobody ever identified who built those camps or why they spent years documenting people working inside the park. The restricted valley remains closed whenever unstable weather damages the old fire road. Every so often another ranger mentions finding footprints that seem more interested in following patrol routes than traveling anywhere. I always tell them the same thing. If you ever get the feeling someone already knows exactly where you're headed, don't assume they're lost. Assume they've been waiting for you to walk that trail again. The radio cracked just after sunset with the kind of urgency that makes every ranger stop what they're doing. Dispatch said they had 3 separate emergency calls about a disabled gray SUV near mile marker 19. The callers all described children crying beside the road, but none of them stayed on the line long enough to explain more. That alone felt strange. Cell service disappears across huge sections of Big Bend, yet somehow 3 calls had reached dispatch within minutes of each other. I grabbed my truck and headed south, already wondering why no one had mentioned seeing another vehicle stop to help. Mile marker 19 sits in one of the loneliest stretches of pavement in the park. The headlights caught the SUV exactly where dispatch said it would be. Driver's door open. Hazard lights blinking weakly. Nobody inside. What caught my attention first wasn't the vehicle. It was the toys. A small stuffed dinosaur rested beside the shoulder. A pink sneaker lay several feet away. A coloring book had blown open across the asphalt, its pages fluttering in the desert wind. Everything looked scattered naturally, as if frightened kids had climbed out in a hurry. I called out anyway. National Park Service. If anyone can hear me, answer back. Only the wind answered. Fresh footprints led away from the road into a dry wash filled with mesquite and loose gravel. Adult prints. Smaller prints mixed between them. I radioed dispatch and requested a full search response. Within 20 minutes, we had 6 rangers working the washes while 2 others secured the roadway. Search and rescue protocols took over. We marked tracks, checked every drainage, and used thermal optics once darkness settled in. Nothing. No voices, no camp, no family. The footprints simply ended where the rocky ground became too hard to track. One of the volunteers looked at me. How do 5 people disappear out here? I didn't have an answer. Around midnight, my radio chirped again. Thomas, we've got something else. It was Ranger Ellis. His voice sounded unusually tight. Restricted archaeological site near Tornillo Creek. Looks like someone's been digging. I remember staring into the darkness, trying to connect the 2 situations. Then it hit me. Every available ranger in our district was standing around mile marker 19. By the time we reached the archaeological zone, floodlights from another unit revealed a disaster. Several protected excavation sites had been ripped open with professional equipment. Tire tracks from a compact excavator disappeared into the desert. Under camouflage netting hidden inside a shallow ravine, investigators later found fuel cans, spare tracks, digging tools, and food supplies. Whoever planned it had been waiting there long before the emergency call started. Thousands of years of protected history had disappeared in a single night. The realization sat heavily with all of us. Someone hadn't just committed theft. They had choreographed our response. The investigation stretched for months. The SUV itself turned out to be stolen from Phoenix under a fake identity. Every visible VIN had been altered. The license plates matched no registered vehicle in Texas. Then the forensic team found something even stranger. The children's belongings weren't connected to the SUV. The stuffed dinosaur had been reported stolen during a vehicle burglary outside a national park in Arizona. The pink sneaker belonged to a family whose rental car had been broken into in New Mexico almost 3 years earlier. The coloring book came from another theft outside a Utah campground. 3 different families, 3 different parks, 3 different years. Someone had collected those items for one purpose: to convince responding officers that children had walked into the desert. Weeks later, investigators reviewed entrance footage from the park gate. The SUV entered only 30 minutes before the first emergency call. No children, no passengers. Just one driver wearing a baseball cap, pulled low enough to hide his face. The footage showed the SUV stopping briefly near mile marker 19 before the driver disappeared into the darkness. 22 minutes later, another camera captured the same SUV leaving through a maintenance gate normally locked to the public. The gate opened with what appeared to be a valid Ranger access card. It wasn't ours. Someone had cloned one. That discovery changed every security procedure in the park. The official theory says the driver met accomplices waiting beyond the gate while the excavation crew escaped through the backcountry with the stolen artifacts. Most of it makes sense. One detail never has. When crime scene technicians dusted the SUV, they found only the driver's fingerprints. Not a single print on the toys, not on the coloring book, not even on the stuffed dinosaur that had been sitting in blowing sand for nearly an hour before I arrived. Someone had carefully wiped every single item before placing them along that road. Months later, I drove back to mile marker 19 alone during a patrol. The shoulder looked exactly as it always had. Empty road, desert wind. Nothing unusual. Then my headlights caught something lying beside the pavement. It was a small plastic toy truck, clean, perfectly upright. And when I picked it up, there wasn't a speck of dust on it. I spent more than 20 years as a ranger in Great Smoky Mountains National Park, and I always believed every strange report had a reasonable explanation. Bears, teenagers, weather, old buildings settling. Then the break-ins at the preservation cabin started making no sense at all. Nothing valuable disappeared. Every cabin remained locked. Windows stayed latched from the inside. Yet every inspection revealed something different. A sack of flour missing. Half a jar of coffee gone, ashes in fireplaces that should have been cold for months. Once I found blankets folded into perfect squares on a bunk no visitor had slept in for years. At first I figured another ranger had forgotten to log an inspection. Everyone denied it. The cabin sat miles from public trails, scattered along forgotten logging roads swallowed by the forest decades ago. Reaching them meant hiking through thick rhododendron where even radio signals faded in and out. The silence out there felt heavy enough to notice. Our maintenance supervisor was the first to point out something truly odd. "I didn't patch that chimney," he said, staring at fresh mortar on an 1800s stone fireplace. The repair was flawless. Another cabin had a broken hinge, replaced using hand-forged hardware that matched the original construction perfectly. No work orders existed. Someone was preserving park property without permission. We installed motion-triggered wildlife cameras outside 4 cabins. For 2 weeks, the cameras captured deer, raccoons, coyotes, black bears, but never a person. Still, each inspection revealed new changes. Fresh drinking water sat in a bucket. Firewood stacks became neatly organized. Someone even repaired a leaking section of roof before our preservation crew arrived. It was as if the cabins quietly maintained themselves. Food also continued disappearing from remote maintenance caches. Not much. A can of beans, 2 apples, a loaf of bread. Always enough to notice, never enough to trigger an immediate search. I stopped looking for obvious tracks and started studying the terrain instead. Many of these cabins had been built long before the national park existed, back when logging camps covered these mountains. Old maps showed drainage systems and root cellars that modern trail maps ignored. One afternoon, I spotted cool air drifting through leaves beneath an abandoned smokehouse. There was no breeze. Pulling aside loose stones exposed a narrow crawl space. The tunnel beneath smelled of damp earth and wood smoke. Someone had reinforced sections with fresh lumber. The passage connected to another cabin nearly half a mile away, then another. The cabins weren't isolated. They'd been linked underground for generations. The first hidden chamber looked abandoned until my flashlight swept across shelves. Hundreds of journals, every notebook labeled by year. I opened one from 2003. Inside were daily notes. Ranger Collins checks East Porch first. Heavy rain. Search team returned 8:40 p.m. Family from Ohio lost child for 19 minutes. Fire crew arrived earlier than expected. Another notebook documented patrol routes. Another tracked weather. Another listed maintenance schedules. The entries stretched back almost 25 years. Whoever lived here hadn't been hiding from the park. They'd been studying it. Law enforcement sealed the area the next morning. Officers searched every tunnel while I stayed above ground near one of the cabins. Around sunset, an investigator called over the radio. "We've got a warm fire," another voice answered. "No one's here." Minutes later, someone reported a lantern still smoking from being blown out. Every chamber showed signs someone had left only moments before officers arrived. Nobody saw anyone. Nobody heard footsteps. There were simply fresh meals, warm blankets, and empty tunnels. Over the next 3 days, the search expanded. Nothing. The hidden network seemed to end wherever we looked. Then I noticed a draft behind loose boards, beneath the oldest cabin. The space beyond was barely large enough to crawl through. At the end sat a small wooden room unlike the others. Everything inside was organized with unsettling precision. Master copies of cabin keys hung from labeled hooks. Current maintenance schedules lay folded on a desk. There were hand-drawn maps of every historic structure in the district. Then I found another map. It showed ranger patrol routes, mine included. Each name had handwritten notes beside it. Checks windows only, rushes inspections before storms, never looks beneath floorboards. Beside my name it read, "Always notices repairs." Underneath was a date, the next morning's patrol. I backed out so fast I scraped both shoulders against the tunnel walls. By the time deputies reached the room less than 10 minutes later, the desk was empty. The keys, the maps, every journal, gone. Only dust remained where they'd been stacked. The crawl space had one entrance. We had been standing outside it the entire time. The investigation quietly ended months later. Officially, no suspect was identified. The tunnels were filled with concrete. Most of the cabins remained closed except for preservation work. Every so often I'm assigned to inspect one. The locks are always secure, the fireplaces are always cold, but every now and then I find a blanket folded into a perfect square where no one admits to putting it. Last fall, while checking a cabin near Boundary Creek, I lifted a loose floorboard out of habit. Someone had slipped a fresh notebook underneath. The cover already had next year's date written on it, and my patrol schedule was inside before I'd even received it. My name is Luke Smith. I spent 6 fire seasons working remote towers across Wyoming, and every assignment was lonely in a predictable way. Wind, static, and long stretches where nothing happened. Then I was assigned to reopen an old lookout in Shoshone National Forest after the winter closure, and by the second night I was hearing someone who wasn't supposed to exist. The tower sat on a ridge that overlooked miles of dark timber. My first day was routine. I checked the weather instruments, tested the emergency generator, inventoried food supplies, and powered up the forest radio. Before locking away the maintenance cabinet, I signed the tower logbook. Someone else's handwriting caught my eye. Radio contact from Black Pine Lookout. 22:18 hours. Same warning again. The next entry mentioned another conversation with Black Pine. I frowned. Black Pine Lookout had burned during a wildfire 15 years earlier. The tower had been demolished. I'd seen the report during seasonal training. I laughed to myself and assumed a bored ranger had invented ghost stories to entertain whoever came next. By sunset, I'd forgotten about it. Around 9 that evening, the radio hissed through a wall of static. Tower 6. Copy. The voice was faint. I answered. Tower 6 receiving. Go ahead. Nothing. Only static. Then another broken sentence. Black Pine, Road 7. The transmission vanished. I checked signal strength. Normal. I contacted dispatch. Dispatch, did you copy another station? A woman answered immediately. Negative, Luke. You're the only unit transmitting. I just heard someone identify Black Pine. There was a pause. Black Pine hasn't existed since 2011. I know. Probably atmospheric interference. Maybe, except the logbook listed the exact frequency. The next afternoon, curiosity got the better of me. I dug through old map folders stored in the lookout. Road 7 wasn't on any current map. It appeared only on a faded Forest Service map, printed in 2008. The road had supposedly been abandoned after several washouts. That night, the voice returned. Mile marker. Relay. Don't use dispatch. He listens. Each message lasted only seconds. Dispatch continued insisting they detected nothing unusual. By my 4th day, I stopped mentioning the calls. Instead, during a scheduled patrol, I hiked toward the forgotten service road, marked on the old map. The trail disappeared beneath years of fallen timber. Nobody had maintained it in over a decade. After nearly 2 hours, I noticed fresh boot prints. Not many, just one person. The tracks led uphill through dense lodgepole pines until I spotted a rusted chain-link fence almost swallowed by brush. Behind it stood a concrete communication shelter. No markings, no active listing on my maps. The lock had been cut recently. Inside, the smell surprised me first. Coffee. Fresh batteries powered several radio racks that should have been dead years ago. Metal shelves held canned food, bottled water, propane cylinders, blankets, and medical supplies. Enough for someone to stay there for months. Every radio displayed obsolete Forest Service frequencies. One scanner suddenly crackled. Tower 6 check-in weather observation. My own voice. I looked at the timestamp. Yesterday morning, another recording played. A conversation I'd had with dispatch only an hour earlier. The official dispatch log couldn't possibly have reached this place that quickly. Someone had been recording every transmission in real time. Then I noticed the notebooks. Shelf after shelf. Each page carefully documented ranger traffic from across the forest. Dates, call signs, weather reports, search operations, even casual conversations. One notebook was labeled with my name. My stomach tightened. The first page described my hike into the tower before I'd even signed the logbook. It listed equipment I'd unpacked, the food I'd brought, the exact minute I'd turned on the generator. I kept flipping pages. Near the end was a transcript of a radio conversation scheduled for 1700 hours that afternoon. It hadn't happened yet. At exactly 5, my portable radio chirped. Dispatch requested my evening weather report, word for word, exactly as written. I backed away from the shelf. Outside, branches snapped somewhere beyond the trees. Not animals, footsteps, measured, deliberate. I shut off my flashlight. The shelter fell silent except for cooling electronics. A shadow crossed the dusty window. Someone stood outside. I couldn't see a face, only the outline of a backpack and an old Forest Service hard hat. The figure remained perfectly still for several seconds before walking away without a sound. I waited almost 20 minutes before stepping outside. Whoever it was had vanished into miles of wilderness. Later that evening, I reported the relay. Law enforcement responded with helicopters and investigators. They found hidden trail cameras already installed nearby. The footage showed the same unidentified man visiting the relay dozens of times over several months. He never used roads, never approached from the same direction twice. He traveled entirely through the backcountry, slipping around every checkpoint. Despite weeks of searching, they never found him. The relay was dismantled. The stolen radios disappeared into evidence. The shelter was demolished. When I packed up the lookout at season's end, I signed the final maintenance entry. As I closed the logbook, I noticed one fresh line beneath my signature. The ink was still wet. Radio contact completed. Luke finally asked the right questions. No one else had been inside that tower.